These are the grammar notes for Futato Chapter 9. There were no grammar notes for Futato Chapter 8. You could just skim that chapter. Prepositions. There are two kinds of prepositions. You should know that there are these two kinds and how they're distinguished. There are independent prepositions, those not joined to a word, not prefixed to a word. And there are inseparable prepositions, those that are prefixed or joined to a word. Now, inseparable prepositions have some pointing issues, some vowel issues. You should be aware of these, not get thrown off. But as I mentioned in the overview, if you have a noun and all of a sudden you know your vocabulary, you have a noun, and then there's a lamed, a bet, even a mem or a kaf prefixed to that noun, you know it's a preposition. So you don't really have to worry about the pointing, but I don't want you to get thrown off by the fact that the normal pointing, which is the shava underneath the preposition, will change. Don't let that bother you or distract you. You don't even need the vowels, but I thought I should include it here anyway. So pointing, normally we have the shava underneath the preposition. Our example here is bet, preposition bet. When prefixed to a word whose first letter already has a shava, then the preposition gets a hirek vowel. Right there. It'll change from shava to hirek, the single dot. When prefixed to a word whose first letter already has a compound shava, like so, here we have a patak with the shava, the compound patak shava vowel. Vocalization, shavas are of course half vowels actually. So when we have one of these, we can either have a patak with the normal shava sign or a sagol or a comets. Okay, we know what the compound shavas are. When you get one of those and you add your preposition right here, then the corresponding short vowel of the compound gets placed underneath the preposition. So it'll look like the corresponding short vowel. But again, you don't need any of the vowels if you know your vocabulary. When prefixed to a word that has a definite article, the he, of course, with that patak and then the dagesh in the first consonant of the noun, that's the form of the definite article. When a preposition hits that, the article is replaced by the preposition. So here we had hayom. Notice we have the he, definite article with the patak, and then the dagesh in the next consonant, the first consonant of the actual noun. When you want to add the preposition to that, you just replace the he. So here we have preposition bet with our patak and then the dagesh in the first consonant of the noun. So hayom would become bayom, the day, and this would be in the day in translation. Independent or inseparable prepositions. The Futato talks about the preposition min. The noon of the min, right here, the second consonant, will assimilate or be absorbed into the following consonant, since in pronunciation it began to sound like the following consonant. So we began with the theoretical form of min zavach, and that in pronunciation began to sound like mizavach, and so they just doubled the zayin and dropped the min. Well, they didn't really drop it. It gets absorbed into the zayin consonant here, and that is shown or telegraphed by the doubling dagesh dot that's added. So mizavach, okay, from a sacrifice. The exception, excuse me, is before a guttural or a resh. Those don't take dagesh dots, as we've learned. In that case, then the noon will just drop out here. It just looks like it disappears, but it gets represented by the dot. So it doesn't really drop here, but if the first consonant of the noun that it's attached to is a guttural or resh, it will just drop out, and then the vowel is lengthened to telegraph that. So here, theoretically, we would have min aim from mother, which would be starting to sound like aim, and you have the consonant, the doubled consonant, which really can't be represented by the dagesh dot because this is a guttural. So min just drops out of the picture, and to represent the union of the preposition and the noun, since we can't represent it with a dagesh, this vowel will lengthen, may-aim, from mother. So again, if you know the rule, that's great, because that's really the fundamental thing. If I took the vowels off this, if you knew your vocabulary, that you don't have a word mem, aleph, mem, but you do have this one, aleph, mem, aim, mother, then if you knew the rule, you would say, oh, well, this is probably the min preposition. I probably have from mother here. And that would be correct. You don't actually need the vowels, but in this case, they might help because of the tsera might trigger that in your memory. But regardless, if you know your vocabulary, you should have no trouble picking out the words you've learned and then deciding, well, what's that thing added to the front? Then it's a matter of knowing the content of the grammar in the grammar book. Conjunction vav. The normal form is just what it looks like here, the vav with the shava underneath. By rule, I've tried to abbreviate these rules. I do want you to read through Futado's rules about the vav conjunction and the different forms it takes and all that stuff, but to sort of condense all that, any vav that begins a word is a conjunction. You're not going to have vocabulary words that begin with vav. Okay, so anytime you see a vav beginning any word, that vav is a conjunction, regardless of how it's pointed with vowels. Regardless of what it looks like, it's a conjunction. Verbs, again, you have to know your vocabulary. Verbs prefixed with vav conjunction often take a special vowel pattern. Now, he didn't give you that in this chapter yet. He's going to give it to you in a later chapter, but I'm just telling you that when you see a vav at the beginning of any word, you know it's a conjunction. But when that word happens to be a verb, then you're going to have to pay attention to how it's pointed. And in a future chapter, you'll understand why. But I'm just sort of giving that little bit of information ahead of you now. Be able to distinguish from your vocabulary verbs and nouns. The above is the only reason to know that the normal form, the vav with the shava, this fact right here, this special pattern that you haven't gotten yet, when the form before a verb is not the normal form, there's going to be something here that you haven't had yet that's different, then that will become important. The vav with the compound shava, or the form before the BMP consonants, again, that's only going to happen really, well, I shouldn't say it will only happen before nouns. That's not specifically true. It's not always true. It's mostly true. But this fact, this middle note right here, is the only reason you need to even pay attention to how your vav conjunction is vocalized. But to summarize, any time you see at the beginning of a word, it's going to be a conjunction. But when it's a verb, you have to pay attention to what it looks like. And we'll get to that in a future chapter. That's the end of the video for the grammar notes for this chapter.